You're experiencing the Authentic Chaos Podcast, an exploration into our inner selves and journeys of self-discovery. I'm your host, Vahagan Yarnosian, and, it's been a while. I keep saying that, but I've been having struggles with motivation recently. I've had a lot of things on my plate, and I want to talk about motivation because something sparked me to come up with this episode. And it's not just, I promise this isn't an episode on motivation. I just want to talk about a little bit about motivation before I get into the topic I was inspired by. So for me, I know some people refer to motivation or inspiration as like a spark, like some kind of thing that ignites. But for me, it's closer to a motivation feels like the rising tide or the glow of a warm sun or the smell of freshly baked bread or just this sense of being uplifted, this sense of maybe this energetic flow or this flow of creativity or something that gets me in the mood where I am able to come up with some kind of inspiration. And I was wondering if other people felt that way too. Like, how does motivation feel for you? Maybe it's something to reflect on. Like, is it more of a spark or is it more of a flow? But I think I've noticed a lot of patterns in me over the past several years, and especially as I reflect on past reflections, past episodes, because this podcast is kind of like a video journal for me. Or an audio journal, but even my written journals. And it's interesting to reflect on the patterns that I've developed over time or that seem to be part of me. And patterns are a part of a lot of aspects of our lives and how we understand the world. There's patterns in nature, right? We have seasons that are cyclical. We have time, which seems to be this cyclical thing. We have like the sun, how the sun moves is a cyclical thing, but we also have patterns within ourselves. We have patterns of hunger, right? We're hungry at certain times of the day. We have patterns of sleep. We have some of these biological patterns, but we also have some mental patterns. Like, have you ever felt like you keep getting caught in a similar situation, maybe at work, where every few months you feel this big rush of stress, that stress kind of sinks into other parts of your life, and it causes so many problems. And this brings me to the topic of this chat. It's that we don't always see that stress. We don't always see those patterns. We don't always see the complexity behind the patterns that we live. Maybe let's use that same example. Every few months or every few weeks, you get really stressed out at work, and that stress seeps into your daily life. And so maybe once a month you have conflict, start to get bitter and maybe have arguments with your partner or loved ones. And you don't know where that comes from, but for some reason you're irritated, or maybe you find that there are more things wrong with the house or something like that, and these problems seem to be to really get to you, and things like that start to frustrate you and upset you. And maybe you see the problem as, oh, I'm really agitated right now. I need to do something about that agitation, and that's great. It's good to know to solve some of the more pressing problems we have. But maybe in just solving that problem, you're ignoring the broader picture. You're ignoring the puzzle. What if when we try to see problems, or when we see problems, we actually miss the puzzles that are deeper within? And to define some nomenclature, let's say a problem is something that is wrong, something that is going against your expectations, and you need to find a solution for, or you want to find a solution for. Whereas a puzzle is something that you don't quite understand, and maybe you don't even recognize. But usually these problems that we have are symptoms of a larger puzzle, a larger structure, maybe even a larger problem, but there's some kind of hidden structure here. Using this work example, maybe if you said, hey, I feel agitated for some reason every few weeks. I've been having some conflicts with my spouse or my partner, or maybe, I've had these problems seem to arise around the house. But like maybe those problems are always, maybe for instance, those problems are always there around the house, but you notice them more when you're in this stressed state. And so maybe the problem you recognize, okay, what if the problem isn't that I'm getting agitated? Maybe there's some other problem. And then you can look back a little bit and be like, oh, well, there are these conflicts that keep arising. I don't know why they keep arising, but maybe that's not the problem either. And then you can look back and be like, oh, well, I seem to be really stressed around this time. So maybe there's something going on there. And then you can go back and be like, oh, it seems like something at work is the cause of this stress. So in doing so, instead of trying to solve every single fire that comes up, every single more immediate problem, or even just ignoring those and just dealing with the most surface level problem, which is your agitation in this case, maybe if we did the time to find that larger problem, that larger puzzle, it's something that we could actually solve multiple of these problems. And, this might be a bit of a simplistic example, but it kind of shows my this thinking about that the problems that we face in our lives aren't always these single problems. They usually are overlapping. There are these patterns, right? These patterns show up, and sometimes they show up in ways that don't make us feel good, that make us notice more of the issues in our lives, or maybe mess with our expectations. But maybe they mess with our expectations because we don't understand the larger puzzles. Because those puzzles, those patterns, those puzzles, they're not easy to understand. Finding what I love about solving puzzles, and I've loved this from a young age, is that there's a mental gratitude or a stimulation I get when I figure out a pattern and maybe find a deeper level to that puzzle. It's like this tickling sensation that I started to understand someone else's line of thinking, that I was able to understand whatever they were trying to communicate to me in a deeper way. Mathematics is a puzzle in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, it's not something that people can understand, but language is also a puzzle. Think about how maybe you have tried to learn another language recently, right? There are all these apps that make it so easy to pick up languages. So what are the most common things you do when you're trying to pick up a new language? Well, you start with the most basic elements. You start with what are the foundations of that language, and then you build on top of it. Language becomes this pattern that you solve in your mind as a way for you to communicate your thoughts, your expressions. So all of us are natural puzzle solvers. It's just a matter of maybe wanting to solve it, having that motivation to solve it. Or maybe it's a matter of changing your perspective on what these puzzles are. It's not always like an arbitrary thing, and there isn't always one right answer. The world and our problems aren't always like these jigsaw puzzles where every piece has a specific place. They're more open-ended than that. They can be more, there isn't necessarily a single creator of this puzzle of life that we're dealing with, but there are multiple factors at work. There are these multiple patterns. There are these forces. There are other people. There are other people and social situations and competitions, and all of these factors create these very complex puzzles, these puzzles of life. But that doesn't mean that we can't try to understand them. And while we may not understand them completely fully, we may be able to understand them enough to know that maybe our expectations need to be adjusted, that maybe how we deal with these puzzles needs to be adjusted. Maybe how we think about these problems needs to be adjusted. Every problem doesn't have to be like a fire, like this super urgent thing that needs to happen, be solved. Maybe if you're in a situation where this problem isn't really like threatening you in any way, you can kind of like calm yourself or take a step back. Maybe not calm, but take a step back and gain that, trying to get a bit of another perspective. And even if it is, and I'm not asking you to step back for hours or days or even minutes, it can be just take a couple of seconds to take a breath. Give yourself time to consider what your reaction was and what your contemplation is, right? Because like every time we get a stimulus, we have this reaction, right? We want to do a certain reaction. When someone is angry at us, we want to respond in some kind of way. If someone like is arguing with us, we want to respond in some kind of way. If something is threatening in general, we want to respond in some kind of way. But we know that isn't always the right thing. If someone meets you with anger, meeting them with anger doesn't help. If someone is arguing with you, sometimes responding immediately isn't the right thing. If someone is misconstruing what you're saying, maybe getting defensive isn't always the right thing. But these are the reactions that we have. But when you take the step back and let yourself think, you can try to unravel what is actually happening. You can unravel what the actual problem is. And, that in this case, that is the understanding what that person is communicating. Because think about it. Communication is itself a puzzle. So every fight you have isn't just a fight. It's more than that. It's the words that are being said. It's when they're being said. It's how they're being said. It's what the other person is trying to convey. It's what you are hearing and what you are understanding from the other person. And we just talked about the information that you're getting. What about what you're giving? What about what you're feeling and how this situation is impacting you and how you feel about both the conversation and the matter of the conversation itself, right? You can feel differently about both of these. Maybe, and then consider like how you're presenting. What is your body communicating? What are your words communicating? What is your tone communicating? There is so much complexity in just a simple conversation, let alone a fight, let alone these larger problems that seem to face our lives. There are layers and layers and layers of deeper patterns that if you want to be able to solve these problems, these fires, you have to understand. You have to seek out and understand these patterns, because that's how you will ultimately solve this puzzle. People ask me, sometimes people ask me, like, when was the last time you got angry? And that's a really hard a question for me to answer, because I don't even remember the last time I got angry. I hardly ever get angry. And the reason why I don't get angry or don't choose to get angry is that I recognize that anger is just a mask. It is a shroud that obscures what I'm actually feeling. It obscures what I actually want to communicate. It may completely negate what I'm saying and shut someone else out from understanding what I'm trying to communicate. And I go through I go through my life having a difficult time communicating with people. And that's why I've done things like that's why I ultimately do my podcast in a way, because I want to represent how I communicate. And this is the culmination of years of having difficulty communicating what is in my head with other people. And now, because of that, I have developed a lot of just building on my communication and being very like explicit with what is in my head, and kind of just giving the patterns of thought, giving you the narrative of what is in my head. So because of that, I've become a very vulnerable and very open communicator. But also because of that, I find that people don't usually misconstrue what I say very easily, because I'm usually very explicit, and I try to be concise, but I can be long-winded, as I'm sure you can tell. But when I'm long-winded, I try to be very, usually it's because it's a complicated topic and I have a lot of context I want to build. And context is a huge aspect of communication. And that context can be how you're feeling when you dealt with that, whatever you're talking about, how you're communicating, the reasons why you had those thoughts, whatever the environmental situation was, the memories behind it. There's so much behind what you're saying and what you're communicating. There are all these layers of biases. And I found that when I treat myself as a larger puzzle, I've been able to really identify a lot of my patterns and a lot of my habits and a lot of my virtues and vices, and I can now explain them in very clear ways. And that's why I'm able to do stuff like this, because literally earlier today I thought to myself while I was sitting by the water, I really don't feel like a puzzle solver. Like I used to tell people, and I used to tell myself that I liked solving problems. But now I realized I don't really, it's not that I like solving problems. I like solving puzzles. That's what I meant to say earlier. I like solving puzzles. And because of that, I kind of find, I've started to see lots of things as potential puzzles. Understanding other people is a bit of a puzzle. You have to figure out how to properly communicate what you'd like to know about them, and ask them questions that show that you're interested, and then you can start to peer through their perspective. I was talking with a total stranger at a bar a week ago, and we had never met each other, but then we started talking about what excites him, and then we started talking about spirituality, and then our perspectives on time, and I started understanding him on a level that that I thought was really refreshing, and just felt so exciting, because I was hearing and I was learning this whole new perspective about the world that I live in, and it just felt so gratifying. This person who I had no idea about, that completely passed by, that I probably passed earlier that day, shared with me part of his world, and it was a beautiful thing. And I look at the problems that I face day to day as potential puzzles to solve. Maybe sometimes I wake up and I'm in a funk, and I like to think okay, why am I feeling like that? Where is this coming from? Or why does this occasionally happen? Or maybe because maybe I didn't actually get very good sleep, or maybe I went to bed and with anxiety, and maybe maybe if I chase what the source of that anxiety was, I can try to resolve situations like that. And so maybe ask yourself next time you've got like a problem that's going on, a fight, stress, it seems like things are always going wrong. Maybe it would be good to look more inward and think about like, okay, what could be causing me to suspect that? Why do I think this? I think that's a great place to start. Anytime you're feeling some kind of weird way, ask, what is causing this feeling? Where is this feeling coming from? And if you keep going down that route, you might find some patterns of your own. Journaling helps here immensely, because journaling can be like a conversation with yourself, and a conversation with yourself that is private and doesn't have to involve verbal communication if you don't want to. I know, like, I feel like there's like a bit of a stigma against like talking to yourself, but I talk to myself regularly. I mean, basically, what is talking to myself in the podcast, right? Like, I'm talking to myself right now, and it's very natural for me because I do it a lot, and it actually helps me immensely when I'm solving problems, because even if I'm not like answering myself, I mean, sometimes I kind of am. I'm like talking through solutions or talking through patterns or talking through something I've learned, and it helps me understand the material a little bit better. It just helps to hear me say it sometimes. And if I can explain it to myself or to someone like competently, then it really shows that I've really understood it and that I really get it. And same thing goes when I talk about like people I've met. The fact that I was able to like describe the conversation I had with this guy shows that, I do care about the things that I'm hearing, and I pay attention to it. And a lot of it comes from years and years of talking to myself and like, kind of reflecting on what was said, or just being in the habit of having like constant conversation. It may not be for everyone, but I find that it helps me a lot. And if you're like me, I have a really hard time doing written journals, actually. I have only ever kept like 1 or 2 journals throughout my whole life. It's very rare for me to write in them. I need like a source of inspiration. It's not something that I can do regularly, just because sometimes I don't feel inspired to write. I don't know, for some reason, me in writing, like, it's hard to find inspiration for me to write, but it's easy for me to find inspiration to orate, to talk, to just chat with someone, to talk to people about the things I feel or I'm thinking. So I'll have a lot of these conversations with people in my life, or even with myself, if it's something that I'm not ready to communicate with someone. It really helps for me to talk to myself so I can kind of find the words. And then through this conversation, I solve the puzzle of how do I make myself understood better? Because if I can understand myself, and if I can hear the words and then say like, yeah, that's what I'm trying to communicate, then I know how to explain it to other people, or at least I know how to better explain it for other people. It's certainly better than not practicing at all. And a lot of times communication is practice. Hell, I mean, when you're doing like learning languages, you need to like continually practice. And I don't think that really changes for our native tongue. Just because we use it a lot doesn't mean that we don't need the practice to express more complicated thoughts. If you're stuck in a loop of always repeating the same conversations over and over again, and like very surface conversations, maybe you forget how to have like deeper conversations. Maybe you don't know how to have deeper conversations. And then maybe those conversations become frustrating or confusing or off-putting because of that. But why? They're just conversations just the same. Talking about ourselves should feel no different than talking about the weather. In fact, I think talking about ourselves is more important than talking about the weather, because I don't need to talk to you about the weather. Honestly, I experience the weather in my life. I don't need to hear about how terrible work is, because let's be honest, most of our work is terrible. I don't need to hear oh, what are your hobbies? What do you do? Because it usually leads to the same conversations over and over again. It's when I start hearing about your perspective, your opinions, what excites you, that I start to unravel the puzzle that is you. And so I kind of talked about a few things, but there are patterns in them. There was a larger puzzle to it. And I want you to maybe go back home, reflect on it. What are some of these puzzles in your life? These problems that keep recurring, but are actually maybe larger puzzles to solve. How are you going to find it? Maybe journaling, maybe talking to yourself, maybe talking to other people. Just anything that maybe could help you get another perspective. And then once you see it, hey, maybe then you can start looking to understand it and to maybe solve it. Just food for thought, you know? Anyway, thank you for joining me. This has been fun. I do enjoy doing this, but like I said, motivation comes in cycles for me. And I don't fight it, because fighting it is when I'm fighting myself, and that always causes unnecessary stress and unnecessary distress. Don't need that in your lives. So thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. If you're listening on YouTube or Spotify, make sure to follow the podcast, share, subscribe to the channel, like the video, like the podcast. If you're on Instagram, we're on Instagram at Authentic Chaos. I'm going to try to post a short or something on it. It'll be fun. And yeah, hope to see you again. And as always, embrace your chaos with kindness.